hey guys, I might end up getting a new phone because this government phone lost the ability to make calls and texts, and we have to find the guy who gave me the phone. Because it's one of those government things where they're in the parking lot, which I know sounds hella sus, and now I know not to trust them. And on top of that, I need to get a plastic health insurance card. But anyway, let's watch this killing Black Dahlia murder case up revisited thing. I can't talk today.
This week on a special episode of BuzzFeed Unsolved True Crime, TNT's I Am the Night has asked us to take a closer look at a case we previously covered, the infamous murder of the Black Dahlia. I Am the Night is a new limited series on TNT inspired by the incredible true story of George Hodel, a teenage girl given a search for prime pile of evidence that has yet to be an episode. We'll take a new look at the murder, the suspects, and the pile of evidence that has yet to be enough to solve this case.
You can't hide the truth forever.
Now, Shane, this was before your time on the show, so you may not have seen this episode.
I have not.
Do you know the case at all, the Black Dahlia?
Hollywood murder. And it's gruesome.
Yeah,
it is gruesome.
There was a movie, I think.
It's also a show.
Oh, yeah. TNT, I Am the Night.
The point I'm trying to get across, it was a little bit shorter because it was one of the first episodes.
That was just you making your little PowerPoints, you know?
Okay, no need to get
Okay,
rude
I'm not
and snappy about it.
Right,
I'm just saying now we've been given the opportunity to dive deep.
Yeah.
I got my goggles on. I'm ready to dive deep.
I got a scuba tank, baby.
Let's go digging.
Around 10 a.m. on January 15th, 1947, Betty Bersinger was taking her 3-year-old daughter Anne on a morning errand to the shoe repair store near what's now the Crenshaw neighborhood of Los Angeles. As they passed an empty lot on Norton Avenue, Bersinger recalls, quote, "I glanced to my right and saw this very dead white body. My goodness, it was so white. It didn't look like anything more than perhaps an artificial model. It was so white and separated in the middle," end quote.
Rough start to this story.
There's a reason why we're going into the grisly details of this, because they'll come in.
Well, you got it. We take no pleasure in this. We're not sickos.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Why are you looking at me with that accusatory glare?
Sometimes I get a little worried about you.
The body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was lying face up and naked, her body split in half at the waist. She was oddly posed, with her eyes open, hands above her head with elbows bent, and legs out straight and spread apart. She had been hit over the head, and pieces of her flesh had been cut out. At the corners of her mouth, there were 3-inch-long slits. As gory as the scene was, there was no blood. It appeared that the body had been drained and scrubbed before being placed where it was found. Betty Bersinger went to a nearby home and called the police to report the body. Bersinger then continued her errand.
I would not be going to get my shoes repaired after that.
I would say that if I saw something as traumatic as this, I'd probably need to, go home and sit down for a little bit. But it is weird to be the first person to arrive on the scene, because when you call in, you are going to be the first suspect, usually.
Yeah.
Well, she's not going to commit a grisly murder on her way to repair her shoes.
Don't underestimate anybody. If history has taught us anything, you don't underestimate anybody.
Anyone can murder.
Anyone can murder.
Julia Child. Do you think she could murder?
If pressed, yeah.
Well, I think she used to be in the CIA, so I think she might have been trained to kill. I think she used to be a spy, but she might have been given the training to possibly take a life. If she needed it to, for defense, self-defense,
I think you could murder if pressed.
I don't know.
If I found out today that you had murdered somebody, I wouldn't be too surprised, I think.
Has someone told you?
No?
Okay.
No loose ends.
After identifying the body by its fingerprints with help from the FBI, the LAPD began circulating a flyer in the hopes of getting more information. It described Short as, quote, 5 foot 6 inches, 118 pounds, black hair, green eyes, very attractive, bad lower teeth, fingernails chewed to quick, end quote. Eventually, more information about the woman began to emerge. Originally from Medford, Massachusetts, Elizabeth Short moved to Hollywood, some say in the hopes of stardom. Like many actresses, she had worked as a waitress and a cashier and had dealt with periods of unemployment as she struggled to get minor acting roles.
That's Hollywood.
That is
Yeah.
Tinseltown.
That's Tinseltown.
You
Gotta
moved from
fuck
Chicago
people to
here
get-
with the same
get
hopes of
the
stardom.
thing.
Yeah.
You did also take an improv comedy class as well, right?
I did, to meet people.
You followed
And
the
I
white guy
found-
playbook in LA.
100%. And I'll tell you what, I did meet some of the most insufferable people that I've
At
ever
an
known.
improv class? I can't believe that.
But they also met me.
And I wish that on no one.
Okay, all right.
It was common at the time for newspapers to bestow nicknames on murder cases.
Yep.
The papers called her the Black Dahlia due to reports that she often wore sleek black clothing and had striking dyed black hair. The autopsy on the body provided a chilling glimpse into Short's final moments. Officially, Short died of hemorrhage and shock. Marks on her legs, wrist, neck, and right thigh suggested she had been bound and tortured. The slits at the corners of her mouth were made while she was still alive. She had also suffered a concussion from blows to her head. Reports say that the cuts were clean, raising suspicions early on that someone with surgical skills may have been responsible.
Yikes.
Gruesome.
One thing to mind from that,
Yeah.
if you wade through all the grisly details, which are upsetting, is that whoever did this had surgical skills. This was not committed by someone, who just picked up a knife at the hardware store. This is somebody who knew what he was doing. He knew anatomy.
Sure.
So that's going to come in big later in the case.
Okay. I wouldn't want to be a detective.
I have no aspirations to be in law.
Some of the most disgusting stuff
Yeah.
I've ever heard.
That's gross, yeah. It's much easier to be an asshole sitting behind a desk like we are.
Yeah.
The gory details
I just listened to, there's a podcast I listen to called That's Messed Up, and they go over SVU episodes and the cases that inspired the episodes. And I listened to the Identity episode, which is one of the most infamous episodes of Law & Order Special Victims Unit. It's the one with the twins and the pervert doctor, based off the John and Joanne case study or fucking whatever. It was fucked up.
and proximity to the glamour of Hollywood caused Short's murder to become a huge story, making page one headlines in Los Angeles for a full month. Feeding this sensation was the apparent murderer themselves. 9 days after her body was found, an envelope arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. It contained some of Short's belongings, including her social security card, birth certificate, photos, and an address book that was missing a few
That's
pages.
fucking terrifying.
All of the items had been cleaned of fingerprints using gasoline, and the envelope had been addressed using cutout letters taken from movie advertisements. All told, 13 letters were sent to the police and press, taunting them as the investigation unfolded. Many signed Black Dahlia Avenger.
We're dealing with a grade A-hole here.
The mob was all
Yep.
over the town. You got dirty cops. The whole town is filthy,
Yeah.
greedy, corrupt. Maybe that's why that woman went to go get her shoes repaired. It's probably
Yeah.
the 5th dead body she'd seen that week. What about that?
One other thing that we should talk about is the address book had a few missing pages, which
So,
means,
what could the killer have been in her address book?
yeah, he probably knew her for a little bit.
There were many suspects throughout the investigation. It's been estimated that hundreds were questioned and cleared. The police contacted about 75 men listed in the address book that was sent to the Los Angeles
Yeah,
Examiner. The
I don't
majority
think
of
you
them
need to
said
get
they'd
'em.
met Short only briefly, going out on a dinner date or to the movies, but that things had ended before they went any further. During the case, the FBI investigated approximately 300 USC medical school students, though it seems nothing came of this. At one point, fingerprints were found on one of the Dahlia letters sent to police. The FBI raced to match these prints with an identity, but the fingerprints were not in their files, so they were unable to find a match. Eventually, the case went cold. After more than 70 years, I think there are 3 main suspects worth examining. The first is a salesman and former Army musician, Robert Red Manley. His relationship with Short began about a month before Short was murdered, when Manley noticed her outside a bus station in San Diego and asked if she wanted a ride. According to Manley, at first, Short would not
Yeah,
speak to him,
just
but he was
fucking man.
persistent, and she eventually did get into his
Damn.
car. For the next month,
Banners,
Manley would
bitch.
take Short on dates when he was in town in San Diego. When the place where Short had been staying in San Diego suddenly fell through, Short contacted Manley and asked him to come pick her up. Manley said next they both stayed platonically in a hotel in Pacific Beach,
Yeah,
after which
platonically.
Manley drove them both to Los Angeles. There, he says he brought Short to the Biltmore Hotel and left her there at about 6:30 on the evening of January 9th. As far as the investigation was ever able to ascertain, that is the last place Short was seen alive, 6 days before her body was discovered. When questioned by the police, Manley pleaded his innocence and willingly took 2 polygraph tests, both indicating that he was telling the truth. Years later, in 1954, doctors gave Manley sodium pentothal, at one point thought to be a truth drug that would induce honesty, and questioned him about the case. Again, it seemed Manley was innocent.
Didn't they determine that's pretty much baloney?
That's some Professor Snape shit. It's
Yeah.
not real.
I do wonder what the effects of it are.
You know what we should do?
Psychological.
We should inject you full of truth serum and then ask you if you think ghosts are real.
Do you think I'm lying about that?
Sometimes I think you're lying to yourself. Now I know this isn't the season for that.
It's not the season.
Manley died on January 9th,
get to that one
1986, after an accidental fall in his apartment in Anaheim, California, 39 years to the day after he last saw Short alive at the Biltmore.
Now that sounds like a coincidence.
An accidental fall on the anniversary of the last time he saw somebody he was accused of murdering.
Oh, so you think he maybe was remorseful and jumped
I'm
to
not
his death?
saying
Or
that.
murder.
It could go beyond coincidence. That's all I'll say.
Other thing though is if I'm living in Anaheim and I've got a balcony and I'm smoking cigars because it's the 80s and I grew up in Hollywood in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
I'm addicted to every substance known to man. And I'm out there on my balcony in Anaheim. It's a miracle that I'm not going over that thing any given day of the week.
Hey, well, you got the fireworks to keep you on the balcony.
Oh, from Disneyland.
Wait, I wonder how loud the fireworks are from Disneyland to like other people in Anaheim hear them. If you're from Anaheim and you live near Disneyland, can you hear the fireworks?
In 1997, for the 50th anniversary of the murder, the LA Times interviewed Ralph Asdell, the last living detective from the original investigation. Asdell claimed that within weeks, he found the man he believed to be the murderer. Asdell had received a few tips and a description of a man witnesses noticed near the empty lot where Short was discovered. Other witnesses described seeing a black car around dawn. Asdell found a man
going
matching
far.
that description, whose car, which had been recently repainted, also looked like the one described. Because Asdell had no hard evidence and only a hunch to go on, he was unable to confront his suspect. But as of 1997, he believed that this mystery man was the Black Dahlia murderer.
Who was the
Great
mystery
insight
man?
provided by Asdell here.
You're not a big fan of this one?
He's the last living detective from the original investigation. He spent 50 years having his nose rubbed in it, and now in the end he's just like, yeah, I knew who it was all along. Can't tell you his name, but I know.
If that's true, kind of a bad detective.
Yeah.
The third and final
detective.
suspect is well known to even
Okay. Suspect number 2 does not count as suspect number 2. Because he didn't name a name. Could it just be like some random guy looking at a dead body?
those only casually familiar with the case, Dr. George Hodel. Many who worked on the case over the years believe they interacted with the real killer at some point. Perhaps no one feels stronger than Steve Hodel. After retiring as an LAPD homicide detective, having worked on over 300 murder cases, Steve Hodel published his research claiming the murderer was one George Hodel, the detective's own father.
But wouldn't that make him a bit biased if he hated his dad?
It's juicy. Can you imagine being a detective, working your ass off on this case? He's got a big board, and suddenly he takes the yarn on the board and just, where am I putting this? On a photo of my father?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, no!
Well, he wasn't assigned to the case. This is something he took on after he retired.
Interesting. Okay, that
So,
makes a little more sense.
His dad also, as you will soon find out, was a bit of an asshole. And it made sense why he would suspect his father of being capable of something horrible.
George Hodel
Yeah, I'm taking this one with a little bit of salt just because of that little bias thing. Because there is a chance he could have just hated his dad.
Hodel was a wealthy doctor in Los Angeles, described as a well-connected, dashing man with a high IQ. George was in charge of a venereal disease clinic in LA, which supposedly gave him knowledge of the sexual lives of people ranging from local sex workers to the city's elite.
Whatever.
While George wasn't a practicing surgeon, he was reported to have breezed through medical school where he'd studied to be one.
Yeah, that guy's a murderer.
After George Hodel's death,
That guy's
his son Steve
totally
found
sus.
2 photos of a woman who Steve believed to be Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia.
I don't think
He began
so.
investigating, coming to believe that his father had a romantic relationship with Short and that they had been spotted together at a hotel in downtown Los Angeles.
So George's son is looking through his dad's photo albums, and he comes across 2 pictures that look strikingly similar to Elizabeth Short. Now, I will say I have not seen any confirmation that they are in fact Elizabeth Short.
Did they run these past any
I've
experts?
seen that they ran past a couple experts, but no one conclusively said yes. But they also didn't say conclusively no.
Are they a little more revealing than that photo of the back of Amelia Earhart's head that you tried to pass off as
I
evidence?
didn't say I tried to pass that off.
Okay.
That wasn't mine.
You see her face in these things, though, right?
You do see her face.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have his profession, which gives him a unique insight. And then you have these photos. And then you have the claims that they had been seen together at places.
Yeah.
So he obviously knew her, at the very least.
George Hodel would have had the medical training needed to produce the surgical mutilation performed on Short's body. And that is only the beginning. Steve has suggested that George is also responsible for the murder of Jean French, which occurred a mere 3 weeks after Short's, on February 10th. Like Short, French received blunt force trauma to the head, and her body was also found oddly posed in a vacant lot early one morning.
Well, she also cut in
French's
half.
body bore the initials BD, possibly thought to stand for Black Dahlia, written in red lipstick.
What if this is just a copycat
BD.
killing?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Did they send any letters following that one?
No, but the actual writing of BD is going to come into play. The penmanship of it.
Ooh.
Notes allegedly sent by the killer after the murder match Hodel's handwriting, according to handwriting analysis performed by one forensic expert hired by Steve Hodel. That expert also believed that the BD initials written on Jean French's body matched George Hodel's handwriting.
Now, that comes with obviously the disclaimer that it was a handwriting expert hired by the person who's purporting the theory.
Yeah.
But
Are there crooked?
And also, hasn't handwriting analysis been like debunked or some shit?
Handwriting
I can't
experts?
see why this person would be would aid in the miscarriage of justice.
Right.
Right? That doesn't make any sense to me.
If you're a handwriting expert, you got to do your best.
Yeah,
How many
yeah.
jobs are you getting? I also, I don't know if this is weird, but I think there's more weight to it because it's his son doing the accusing.
I think it
Yeah.
could be less because
Blood against blood?
well, it could show a personal vendetta.
Exactly.
If this guy had a bad childhood, which
Strong, though.
but he was not a
He
good
was
dad.
an a-hole.
He was not a good dad.
Evidence was found that Hodel had 50-pound sacks of concrete sent to his home for remodeling
That
on
is
January
sus.
9th, 1947. The last day Short was seen alive, and less than 1 week before her body was found. Hodel's son has claimed that there were similar bags found near Short's body that police speculated could have been used to carry Short's body from the car to the lot. What's more, George drove a black 1936 Packard that looked similar to the descriptions of the black car that had been seen at dawn near the empty lot where Short's body was found. Steve's research pointed out similarities between how Short's body was found and works by George's reported friend, surrealist artist Man Ray. The Dahlia's arms were posed above her head, not unlike Man Ray's photograph possessed by MoMA, Minotaur. As for the slits on Dahlia's mouth, they could have been inspired by the artist's painting, Observatory Time, The Lovers. According to Steve, George idolized Man Ray and wanted to be an artist himself. Could the Black Dahlia have been George's
yes.
sick attempt at art?
By taking the serial killer route?
One of George's daughters, Tamar Hodel, recalled her father hosting huge parties at their Hollywood-adjacent home, with guests including Man Ray as well as movie stars. Tamar also claimed she had posed for nude photos for Man Ray when she was a child. After running away from home in 1949, Tamar reported
flag.
her father to the police, telling them he had tried to teach her about oral sex at the age of 11, that he had offered her to his friends for sex when she was 14, and that George himself
Jesus
had had
Christ.
sex with her.
What?
If this man is not a murderer,
He's obviously a bad man.
yeah, this guy is awful. Surprised these kids didn't get together and just kill their dad.
Well, one of them said, hey, maybe I'll indict him for murder.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Okay. Yeah.
As a side note, at age 15, Tamar gave birth to a baby girl in San Francisco.
Oh boy.
That girl, Fauna Hodel, would be adopted by a family in Nevada and not know the story of her biological grandfather until much later when conducting research of her own.
Do we know who her father is?
I'm not saying this is what happened, but it's possible that Tamar, since she claims that George had had sex with her at the age of 14 and gave birth to a baby at 15, it's possible that the father of that baby, which is Fauna Hodel, could have been George, her grandfather.
Ew.
Oh, this guy's a real piece of shit, Ryan.
Do you see why I said Steve Hodel may have a conflict of interest
Now,
now?
yeah, now I thought you were just like, oh, he didn't let me, go to the baseball game on a Friday night.
No.
Oh, he's a monster.
Yeah, he's a monster.
Yeah.
I forgot about that fucked up detail. That guy's probably in hell.
George Hodel was ultimately acquitted of incest
What?
charges after several other family members testified that Tamar was
No.
lying. There are those who have stated, however, that the family could have been motivated to do so because
Yeah.
George was the breadwinner supporting the family. In 1950, a few years after the Black Dahlia murder, George Hodel moved, or perhaps fled, to the Philippines. Perhaps not so coincidentally, a woman murdered in Manila in 1967 reportedly was also
Yeah,
found
that's what I said.
bisected
That's
and
what
posed in an
related.
empty lot, just like the Black Dahlia. Steve claims
Okay, here's my theory. What if the pervert Hodel was inspired by the murder? He was doing copycat killings.
that at the time, George Hodel was living just a half-mile away from the crime scene. In 2012, Steve Hodel visited his childhood home with a production crew, another former police officer, and a search dog that picked up the scent of human decomposition in multiple locations on the property,
What
such as the
fuck?
alleyway in back of the house. According to Dr. Arpad Vass, a leading forensic anthropologist who helped pioneer chemical analysis of human decomposition, this does not technically indicate that remains are located where the search dog found the scents, because the markers the dog detects can move, carried by water and other forces over the decades. However, Vass himself analyzed a soil sample taken from the alley behind the home and found that it was positive for human
Oh, boy.
remains, though the sample indicated a death that occurred anywhere from 20 to 100 years ago.
Quite likely beside the point, but I always feel bad for those dogs that gotta sniff dead bodies all day.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely not preferable to the ones that have to sniff for, like, cocaine.
Cocaine? Those dogs are loving.
Best
I
job
fucking love my
best job I've ever had.
After hearing about the
Although on a kind of sad note, that I heard that rescue dogs in 9/11 were getting depressed because they kept finding dead bodies. So the handlers had to pretend to be rescued people so the dogs wouldn't be so depressed.
George Hodel theory, LA Times reporter Steve Lopez went to the Los Angeles DA and was given access to case files and grand jury documents. In the files, he found a photo of George Hodel, listing him among 21 other suspects. Lopez also found records indicating that the LAPD had snuck listening devices into Hodel's home undetected and listened to Hodel for 40 days in 1950, not long before he left for the Philippines. The recordings do not exist anymore, but transcripts of the recordings were left in the DA's files. Lopez says one of the transcripts had recorded Hodel saying, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead," end quote.
Well, people don't usually say stuff like that.
It sounds like dialogue written for a villain. Like, that's something that a normal person doesn't say, I feel like.
Another transcript describes what may have been the sound of a woman being attacked in the house's basement. According to a CBS 48-hour special on the case, the investigation into Hodel's possible ties to Short was shut down abruptly in 1950, with one of the lead investigators stating that the recordings taken from Hodel's home eliminated him as a suspect.
What?
If that sounds suspicious to you, you're not alone. George's son claims his father, via his connections and occupation, had knowledge about corruption in the LAPD and their ties to prostitution and abortion rings, and that the police covered up Hodel's guilt to avoid their own dirty laundry being aired. Indeed, some officers in the LAPD were notoriously corrupt in the early 20th century, and the transcripts from the bugs left in Hodel's house also reportedly quote George as saying, "This is the best payoff I've seen between law enforcement agencies. I'd like to get a connection made in the DA's office," end quote.
It's a little on the
Sassy
nose
bitch.
there.
If it sounds like a duck, it walks like a duck.
It's a murderer.
It's George Hodel.
Again, why does it always come back to evidence being gone? What happened to the tapes? They conveniently fell in the trash.
Well, seeing that these tapes say this about the LAPD, who is then in charge of the chain of custody of said tapes, it makes sense to me that those tapes would vanish.
Yeah.
Upsetting. But then again, when you look at that and you see, oh, the tapes disappeared while they were in the custody of your establishment, that only makes you look bad. So regardless,
They don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Yeah.
No.
Lending credibility to the corruption allegation, according to the 48 Hours investigation, the LAPD admits that much of the physical evidence from the Black Dahlia case is not with the files.
What?
It's unclear where it is
Where
or
is
why
it?
it would be missing.
pretty clear.
I understand, there's bureaucracy, you gotta fill out forms, stuff goes places. Oh, do we put that on this shelf or that shelf? I don't know. But they probably have some pretty good systems in place.
Yeah.
Oh, what if the guy just collected this? What if someone just it's like, oh, this is a morbid thing. I like this morbid thing. I'm gonna add it to my collection of other morbid things.
They're police. You should be able to keep track of these things.
If we could suss anything out of that, it's that Shane Day believes the LAPD are crooked.
Yeah, they just are.
While there are some doubts as to
Lots
whether
of
the
cops are
photographs found in
crooked.
George's photo album are actually of the Black Dahlia,
Unfortunately, good amount
or
are
if his
crooked.
handwriting does match the letters sent to the police and press, there's enough cause for suspicion without those leads to keep the lens focused on George Hodel. After reviewing the Hodel case, Stephen Kay, the then LA County head deputy DA who'd prosecuted murder cases for over 35 years, stated he believed the case had been solved. Speaking for himself, not the DA's office, quote, "I would have no reservations about filing 2 counts of murder against Dr. George Hodel," end quote.
Stephen Kay, throwing it on the table.
I mean, I commend him, but at the same time, duh.
George Hodel returned to the United States from the Philippines around 1990.
He was still
He died
alive?
in 1991 at the age of 91.
I've always wondered, since they found the fingerprints on that Dahlia letter, can't they take little George's fingies and put them on the thing and see if they match?
Well, now they're bones.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
sure they have George's fingerprints on file.
Do they?
They have to.
Was he ever brought in for anything?
He was a suspect.
The incest charge.
Today, the case is still open, but it has been decades since authorities were actively investigating. Perhaps most frustrating is the sentiment expressed by John Douglas, former head of the FBI's Serial Crimes Division and one of the nation's leading experts on profiling violent crimes. Douglas notes that so much information can be ascertained from the murderer's interactions and time he spent with the body that today the crime would be, quote, very solvable, end quote. The Black Dahlia murder riveted the nation and continues to fascinate sleuths today. Was the Black Dahlia merely the most infamous murder at the hands of Dr. George Hodel? Or is there another answer out there, lost to time? For now, the case remains unsolved.
What are you gonna do?
Charged George Hodel with 2 counts of murder, according to the DA.
Except he's
Chisel
dead.
into his gravestone.
Murderer?
Also a murderer.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know what you do. Part of justice is forcing penance upon the person who did the deed, right?
Yeah.
Sure. There's no justice. Sleep tight, everybody.
Oh, no, wait, here we go. Here,
Okay.
How about this? How about this?
Yeah.
Another part of justice is that the living descendants of the people who had the act committed against them, now they could find solace that the true perpetrator has been pointed out. Like,
That's
Yeah.
something.
it's good for the living descendants.
Closure.
Yeah.
Check out I Am the Night.
I would just spray paint the grave, But yeah, I kind of think that George Hodel's a copycat, not the killer.